All right, let's talk about a component that every front-end developer has wasted hours and hours of their life on: tables. So I've got an example here. This is inspired by the table from Catalyst, which is our React UI kit that's part of Tailwind Plus. And as you can see, it looks really great on desktop here. But when I resize the window, all of a sudden it starts to bleed off the screen. And now we've got this overflow problem where the entire screen is scrollable. Now, for very specific designs, if you have a lot of control over the content, you know exactly what's going in the table, a lot of the time you might design a totally different experience for mobile, where maybe you stack all of the information on top of each other, or pick certain columns that you show and hide, things like that. But for a very sort of general purpose table where you don't always know how many columns they're going to be, what type of content is going to be in those columns, it would be nice if the table was at least scrollable. So the whole screen could shrink down, but you could still scroll through all of the content. Let's work on making that work. So this is what we're going to do first. We're going to take the table here and we're going to wrap the whole thing in a div. And I'm going to move the margin from the table to the div, because I really hate putting external margins on child components. To me, it makes a lot more sense for the outermost element to be the thing that's pushing away from the element before it. So this should look basically the same. I think we still have that same overflow problem. But now if we add overflow x auto to this div, instead of the whole page being scrollable, just the table is scrollable, okay? So now a lot of people might stop here, but there's one little tiny annoying detail about this design that personally drives me crazy, that I hope drives you crazy too. Take a look at what happens when I scroll. Notice how this content is being cut off here by the padding on the page, and likewise on the right, it's sort of entering from where the padding starts. To me, this looks horrible. I want this to work in such a way where when I scroll it, this content can go all the way to the edge, and similarly, the content on this side can come in from the edge. But this is a little bit tricky to do because we've got this padding up here that defines the padding for the entire page. So how can we work around this? How can we make this work? Let me show you what I would do. First step, we need to basically add some negative margin to this element to pull it out to all the way to the sides of the page and sort of compensate for the padding that's on the page. So right now the page has P6, so it's got padding on all sides of 24 pixels. So let's add negative MX6 here, and that should pull the table out to the sides of the page. Okay, so now the table reaches all the way edge to edge, and things are scrolling in from the edge of the viewport and out past the edge of the viewport. This still looks terrible, of course, because now nothing is aligned. So let's fix that alignment. We can do that by adding some padding to sort of, again, compensate for that negative margin. Now to do this, we're going to need to add another wrapper element, okay? So I've got this extra div here, and we're going to put px6 on this to match the negative margin and bring back that page padding. Okay, so now you can see we've got that padding here, and when we scroll, it scrolls all the way to the edge. The whole page isn't scrollable, which is great, but there's still sort of an annoying problem here. Check out what happens when I scroll all the way to the right. We've added this px6 here, but we're not getting padding on the right-hand side of the page. We're only getting the padding on the left-hand side. Super annoying stuff. Let me try my best to explain to you why this is happening, because to be honest, this is a weird CSS browser quirk that even I honestly barely understand. If I go here and find the element with the padding, here's the div where we added that px6. Look what happens when I scroll. See how the div itself is sort of like scrolling off to the left, and the padding stays sort of in the middle of the page here. It's not attached to the end of the element. Best I can figure is this is just sort of the behavior of block level elements in CSS. They expand to fit the width of their parent, and if something inside them overflows, it just doesn't push the content all the way to the end. So a couple different ways we can solve this. I'll walk through two of them. One option is to, instead of making this display block, which it is by default, we can add inline block, okay? And magically making this inline block makes that padding work as expected. So now you can see if I use the inspector here, we can see the padding is now at the end of the element instead of at the end of the viewport. So this is a pretty good solution, but it's got one tiny little annoying issue. Take a look at the bottom of the table. If I hover over this element, you can see the selected area ends right under that last person's name, right? But if I go to the parent element, see how it's a tiny bit taller? So this is just sort of what happens when you make something inline block. All of a sudden it's affected by line height and it's trying to baseline align itself with other elements on the page. So you get a little bit of extra vertical spacing. And if you're not careful and leave this in, it can throw off your layouts. So I'll walk through two solutions. One solution is to add align middle, which sets vertical align middle. And this is going to tell this element not to try and align things by baseline anymore. It's going to try and just center it with other inline elements that it's in flow with. And now you'll see that these elements are the same height. Okay, there's no extra height. So that's one solution. To me, it feels like a little bit hacky, though. It feels like we're sort of repurposing some elements of CSS in sort of a tricky way just to get something to work. Another solution that I find a little bit simpler that also works is to, instead of making this display inline block and adding vertical align middle, if we make the parent a flex container, everything basically works the same way. So the scrolling works, the padding is there on the side, and with any luck, the height issues aren't present either. So you can see there's the end of the element there. This element is the same height. Now, the one thing that you will see is when we go back to the desktop view, this table is no longer expanding to fill the width of the page. To solve that, we can just go down to this div with this px6 and just add the grow class. And now the element grows to fill the available space in the flex container. But when we shrink it back down, everything continues to work as expected. So there you go. That's a simple general purpose, responsive, scrollable table solution. There's one last thing I would do to clean this up a little bit, and that is try and fix this like magic number stuff here. So really what we're trying to do is match this to this value up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a CSS variable here called page padding, and I'm going to set that to spacing 6. And then I'm going to change this to be py6, since that's not really related to the page padding. We're just talking about horizontal padding here. And I'm going to make the page padding use that variable, okay? And then down below, we can do the same thing here. So for this negative margin, that can actually be negative page padding, and this padding can also use the page padding. And now everything is linked together by one value. So if we change the page padding to just 4, everything stays lined up. If we change it to 8, it stays lined up. Another neat thing about this is we could say maybe we want it to be 4 on mobile, but on small screens and above, we change the page padding to be 8 or something, right? And now you can see it's 4 here, but as we increase past the 640, okay, now it grows and everything stays locked together. So it's nice having this sort of single source of truth for what your page padding is and being explicit to actually connect those dots together so that this isn't just an arbitrary MX6 or an arbitrary PX6. Everything sort of is what it is for a reason and is modeled the way that you want the layout to be modeled. So there you go. I think this is a really great solution for general purpose responsive tables. It's my go-to solution when you don't know how many columns there are going to be, you don't know what the content's going to be like. Anyone can scroll side to side. You don't have to think too much about it. And yeah, it just kind of works beautifully. A little bit tricky to get right. Took me a lot of tinkering to figure this out for the first time. But hopefully these little tricks here will help you build these sorts of tables in your own projects.